cordless routers offer freedom, convenience, and an elevated level of safety over their corded counterparts. But with so many options on the market, how do you choose the right one? Well, that's where I can help, because in this video, we're going to rank and compare not one,
not two, not three, not four, not five, not six, not seven,
but 8 of the top cordless routers on the market today. Breaking down their key features, performance, their strengths and weaknesses, and value to help you make the best decision for your shop. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so a few administrative items real quick. 1, I bought all these routers myself. And 2, I don't really have a big shop, so I don't really have a lot of room for a bunch of duplicate tools. But I think having multiple routers can be beneficial for things like keeping one permanently attached to a router table, or attached to certain jigs or bases, or for keeping your most used profile bits always set up and ready to go. But even with that, do I really need all these routers? I mean, just make sure my wife can't hear this. No, I don't need all these routers. Now, I'd love to go into every single detail based on the specs, testing, and my experience, but this video would be even longer than it already is.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
But I'm thinking about putting all that detail and charts and scoring system into an article on my website. So just let me know if you want to see something like that. Okay, so when trying to determine the order to go in, I thought about going in order of price or popularity, or just picking names out of a hat. But my daughter came up with a better idea. And she said, why don't you just go in rainbow order? Okay, sounds good to me. So, Big Red, guess you're up first. Kind of like a reliable old truck that always gets the job done, the Milwaukee Palm Router is a comfortable and dependable tool you can always count on. It may not have all the bells and whistles of some of the newer trucks, but it has everything you need and nothing you don't. The Milwaukee, like all the routers here, has a brushless motor, variable speed, LED lights, and a soft start motor. As a safety mechanism, it also has a spindle brake that stops the spinning router bit instantly as soon as you turn the router off. But all the other routers have that as well, except for one. As far as ergonomics go, I weighed all the routers myself without the battery, and Milwaukee came in at 3 pounds, which was lighter than all but 2 of the routers. The size of the housing and the placement of the rubberized grip is almost perfect, as it leaves you holding pretty much all grip instead of half grip and half motor like some of the other routers. The base is round and not too big, but still big enough to be stable, and gives you a bit of room to place your fingers for extra stability when doing things like edge profile work. Now, fun fact, Milwaukee, Ridgid, and Ryobi are all made by the same company, the TTI Group. And each of their routers has similar adjustment mechanisms, but Milwaukee pulls it off the best. All the adjustment is done kind of in this center stack area. You unfasten the latch and push this button for macro adjustments, and turn this dial for finer micro adjustments. It all happens smoothly with no fuss, which is what sets it apart from the Ridgid and Ryobi that we'll cover here in a bit. To change the bit, there's a spindle lock button, but the spindle also has flat spots on the sides to give you the option of using the 2-wrench method. Which I actually like that they give you that option, because those spindle lock buttons can be a pain to engage sometimes, especially if you have arthritic fingers or something like that. As far as performance goes, surprise surprise, all these routers can do a roundover or a chamfer on a tabletop. But I wanted to test the power, and only half of the routers published power numbers, which Milwaukee was one of them at 1¼ horsepower. But I wanted to test for myself by routing a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch rabbet in this 2-foot long Sapelli board and comparing the speed. Is trying to remove that much material as fast as you can probably pushing the routers too hard? Yes. Are we still going to do it anyway? Also yes. And Milwaukee did not disappoint, completing the task in just 13 seconds. Like I said, I tried to push these routers pretty hard, and the router did shut down once, but the shutdown time is not included in the 13 seconds, just the routing time. But I did use a 2 amp hour battery, which probably resulted in a slower time. I would have liked to have used a 6 amp hour battery for each of the routers in the test, but the sponsor of this video, my wallet, told me, just use the batteries you got. So in the end, all that performance will set you back $199 if you're paying full MSRP. But for that price, along with the router, you get an edge guide, a dust chute, and a rare second base to use for template routing, or if you just want a larger base. A pretty good package if you ask me, but not perfect. Aside from the spindle brake, there is no real other safety tech. There's nothing really preventing it from accidentally coming on, like if it's in your work bag or something with the battery on, like we'll see in some of the other routers. Also, while I really like the adjustment mechanism, the latch is kind of stiff, and while I can loosen that up, then it results in being able to adjust the micro adjustment while the latch is in the lock position, which is obviously not ideal. So overall, a great router, which lands it in this tier right here. And what tier is that? Well, we'll reveal that a bit later. Of the 8 routers here today, 4 of them are what I'd call new, meaning they came out within the past year or so, and the Ridgid is one of those. But given that it's made by the same brand as their flagship brand, Milwaukee router, I thought, there's no way they're going to make this one better than that. And I was right. It's not better than the Milwaukee, but that doesn't mean that it's not still a really good router. And having owned the Ridgid's corded palm router, I could say it's much better than that. My favorite thing about this router is the grip ergonomics. It's better than the Milwaukee for me, and actually my favorite of all the routers. The dimensions are comfortable, and the rubber grip is substantial. And at the bottom of the base, your hand doesn't run into moldings for the fence attachment like some of the other routers. It's a small thing, but I also like the power switch, and the fact that there's no neoprene cover on it. I really hate those things. I suppose that they're there to keep dust out, but my suspicion is that it's more for marketing than anything else. The adjustment happens the same way as on the Milwaukee, except for a couple of small differences. One, the micro adjustment dial is plastic on the Ridgid, where it has this like rubber coating on the Milwaukee, which makes the Milwaukee feel a bit more premium. And 2, the latches work a bit differently. For both, you unfasten the latch to make the micro adjustments, and to make the macro adjustments, you just push this button on the Milwaukee. For the Ridgid, you just push the latch a little bit further to make macro adjustments. But if you push the latch too far, it makes it hard to adjust. So I just find it a bit finicky overall. For the base, I love that Ridgid decided to give us a D-shaped base as the standard for this router. However, I hate the fact that, out of the box, the base comes on backwards. The entire benefit of this style of base is to provide extra stability and a place to put your fingers while routing. But how can it do its job if the square edge is on the same side you grip the router? Ryobi, by the way, is doing the same thing, so it must be on purpose. I just don't know why. So if any of you guys know, please, let me know too. But you can change it, so it's not like it's a deal breaker or anything. I just don't know why it comes that way. And speaking of the way it comes with an edge guide, a dust chute, and a $179 MSRP. And how did it fare in our rabbit test? It did the job in 13 seconds with a 4-amp-hour battery with no shutdowns, which was middle of the pack. As far as listed power goes, Ridgid doesn't list it anywhere I can find, but it did say it's 50% more powerful than the previous model, which is pretty unhelpful. And now we get into the first of the big dogs. And I'm not just saying that because this is one of the top sellers in the group, but I'm saying it because this thing is huge. It has the largest circumference out of all the routers in the group, and it's 2 ounces away from being the heaviest in the group. All in all, this router has a lot going for it, but its size is not one of those things. But we'll get back to that in a minute. I want to start with the depth adjustment, since it's my favorite feature and one of their more unique features. DeWalt does away with fiddling with both macro and micro adjustments and gives you one adjustment to rule them all. You simply unfasten the latch and turn this ring until you get to your desired depth. If you want to better monitor just how much you're adjusting the depth, that's where this yellow ring comes into play. Each tick mark on the ring is 1/64 of an inch, and one full rotation is 1/2 an inch. Now I love this adjustment mechanism, but the only downside to it is that because there's no macro adjustment, it could take a while to cover a lot of ground using just the ring. The other thing I love about this router is the base. It comes with the D-shaped base similar to the Ridgid. But 2 things separate the DeWalt base from the Ridgid. One, of course, it's bigger, which I like for added stability. And 2, it comes installed the right way. Imagine that. Now I joked about the size a little bit earlier, and while it is bigger than the rest of the routers, it's still comfortable in the hands, especially with the large rubberized grip that it has, which is an improvement over the corded version, which is all just solid metal. But the rubberized grip does make it a little bit bigger, so if you have that version and you prefer that grip, the cordless motor will fit in the corded base. And speaking of the corded version, one feature that found its way over to the cordless version that I don't really like is the power button. It's got like a rubber cover on it, not unlike a lot of the other routers, but this one seems to be the worst. It's harder to turn off and on than the others, and the labeling is pretty much impossible to see. but that can easily be forgiven because one of the other things that I've always loved about this router is the power. DeWalt has always been one of the more powerful palm routers on the market, and my little rabbit test only confirmed that. Big Bird here plowed through the Sapili and completed a 2-foot run in 10 seconds with no shutoffs while using a 5 amp hour battery. So overall, I really like the DeWalt router. It's always been one of my favorites, and it should be pretty good because with an MSRP of $219, it's in a tie with one other router for the highest price tag. And what kind of extras you get for your 21,900 pennies? Nothing. No edge guide, no dust chute, no second base, nothing. I mean, well, you do get a wrench. When thinking about the Ryobi, I think about something my boss told me a bunch of years ago when I was working in real estate. And that is, there's no such thing as a bad property, only a bad price. And the same thing I think applies to tools for the most part. So the Ryobi router is not going to be as good as these other routers. But it's also cheaper than all of them, and in some cases, a lot cheaper. So, for the price, is it a good router? Let's find out. The first thing that you may notice on this router is that the motor is in fact brushless and variable speed. That's new for Ryobi as part of their Ryobi One Plus HP line of tools. This router came out in 2024, and those new features are actually why I decided to give it a try and include it in this comparison. Because without those features, I don't think it can legitimately be compared with the other routers here. Ergonomically speaking, the barrel is kind of small, so if you have smaller hands, this one might be comfortable for you. Ryobi also has some limitations with the shapes of its batteries, so the overhang at the top of the router for the battery may lead to some crowding of your hand when gripping the router. The base is identical to the Ridgid, including the fact that it comes installed backwards, and just like the Ridgid, all you need is a screwdriver to flip it around. The adjustment mechanism is similar to its TTI brethren, except the latch is plastic here, where it's metal on both the Ridgid and Milwaukee. I also find the macro adjustment to be a bit stiffer, especially when you get towards the bottom of the adjustment range. Honestly though, I think those types of things are to be expected at this price point. For safety, there is a spindle brake when you turn the router off, but there's no kind of mechanism to prevent you from accidentally turning the router on. But given the style of the on-off switch, I don't think it's necessary. It's not a push-button type of switch, it's one that you have to slide, and it kind of takes a bit of effort to slide it. So I'm not going to say it's impossible to accidentally turn it on, but I really don't see it happening. Like I said earlier, the MSRP for this router is less than all the others at $129. And for that money, you still get a dust chute and edge guide included. So if price is your main concern, this one might be your go-to. I mean, it's almost $100 less than the DeWalt. But for power, it wasn't the most impressive, completing the rabbit cut in a glacial pace of 38 seconds. And it had to take a break 3 times. Now, that was with a 2 amp hour battery, so maybe it'd be faster with a bigger battery. But the Milwaukee also had a 2 amp hour battery and was still 3 times faster than the Ryobi. Plus, this was the battery that Ryobi included in their kit, so I have to assume the router just isn't that powerful. So obviously the Ryobi is not going to be better than the other routers in this comparison. However, if your main concern is price, or you're already in the Ryobi battery platform and you want to stay there, or if you have an older version of Ryobi's 18-volt Palm router and want to upgrade to something with a brushless motor and variable speed, I think you might be happy with this router. If that's not you, I recommend spending a bit more money on one of these other routers. Metabo HPT, also known as Hikoki, and in some other parts of the world outside the United States. Also, formerly known as Hitachi, whereas where the HPT comes from, Hitachi Power Tools. And lastly, not to be confused with Metabo, which is a completely different line of tools than Metabo HPT. But for the sake of brevity, I'm still just going to call it plain Metabo.
Are we clear?
Crystal.
My favorite thing about the Metabo is that it's the only one out of the 8 routers that is truly a one-handed router. You turn on the primary power switch and adjust the speed with your thumb, and start and stop the unit with your index finger, all while maintaining a grip of the router with your same hand. This is great for when you're doing a lot of repetitive routing and constantly turning the router on and off. And it works the same way whether you're a lefty or a righty because they designed the motor to be able to be flipped 180 degrees and inserted into the base. The base is also a little unique, but I'm not sure it's in a good way. The base is completely plastic, which to me makes it feel kind of cheap. but my guess is that they did that for weight savings, which apparently worked because outside of the Bosch, the Metabo ranges from half a pound to 1 full pound lighter than all the other routers. The base also has a square plate, which I'm not a fan of. It does give you a place to put your fingers to stabilize it, but I prefer a rounded base for running along straight edges. The adjustment mechanism is almost identical to the Makita, which if you know your rainbow colors, you know the Makita is coming up next, so I'll touch on that in a minute. Something else this router has in common with the Makita is a safety feature that I'm going to call a primary power button. Basically, it's a separate power button that you have to push first before the on-off button will work. It's great for making sure you don't accidentally turn on the router. And speaking of power, the published power numbers that I was able to find said that the Metabo router only had 0.87 horsepower, which I find oddly specific. So I wasn't expecting much with the rapid test, but the Metabo surprised, in a good way, finishing middle of the pack in 13 seconds without cutting off once. So what is it going to set you back for that level of performance in that light of a package? The Metabo comes in as the second cheapest with an MSRP of $149, with only the Ryobi keeping more cash in your pocket. It also comes with an edge guide, a dust chute, a singular guide bushing, and a trim guide, which I have yet to find a use for. The Makita Palm router is a very popular router with some unpopular features, and probably the feature I see complained about the most, the adjustment mechanism. I kind of like it. Where I think the Makita adjustment mechanism shines the most is in its ease of use, especially when removing the base to change the bit. A bit change that Makita gives you the option to do with either the spindle lock or the 2-wrench method, by the way. All you need to do is unfasten the latch, then take the base off. Simple. There's no unfasten the latch, then push this button, or squeeze these tabs, or turn it a half an inch, or snap your fingers 3 times. There's none of that. I know it's a small thing, but it's simple and I like that. But all that simplicity comes at a cost. Because there is no secondary unlocking mechanism, when you're trying to set the bit height, gravity tends to do gravity things, which means that you have to use 2 hands to have any chance of getting the bit height where you want it. Well, for this I have 2 solutions. The first is to just use 2 hands. I really don't see it as being that big a deal. I mean, it's not the most elegant solution, but it works. The second solution is one that I'm not sure will work on every model, but it works on mine. And that is when you unfasten the latch, instead of opening it up all the way, just bring it in about 1/3 of the way like this. That seems to tighten the base around the motor just enough that now when you turn the knob to adjust it, it stays in place, letting me do that ever sought after one-handed adjustment. And I mentioned that Metabo and Makita have the same adjustment mechanism, but this little trick doesn't work on the Metabo, at least not on mine, maybe because the base is plastic. But even though I like the adjustment mechanism, there are some things on this router that I don't like. I think the base could be bigger to provide more stability, and not only is the diameter of the base small, but the opening of the base is so small that I can't even fit a chamfer bit through it. Those are both annoying, but they can be fixed with just getting a different aftermarket base. One thing that can't be fixed though is the lack of a spindle brake. It really is kind of crazy that this router doesn't have that feature. Not only does every other router in this comparison have it, but I can't remember the last time I bought a cordless tool of any kind that didn't have a blade brake or a spindle brake. But the points it loses for lacking that safety feature, it gains back by employing the same primary power button and separate on-off button that the Metabo does. All in all, I think this is a very good router that needs a little bit of a refresh. The power numbers weren't the best, taking 21 seconds of routing time and shutting down once. Of note though, that was with a 2 amp hour battery, so it may have been better with the bigger battery. And at the price of $199, maybe they should include more extras than just the edge guide that it comes with. I think a second base in particular would be super welcome. Bosch has long been the producer of some of the market's best routers, and a lot of them I own. Like this guy, and this guy, and one of my favorites, this guy. But when literally all of their competition has been entering into and making noise in the cordless palm router space, what did we hear from Bosch? Well, Bosch decided to finally stop giving everybody the silent treatment with the introduction of this, their new 18-volt cordless palm router. The question is, how does it stack up? The The first thing that you'll notice about this router is that Bosch really paid attention to the ergonomics. The rubberized texture that envelops the base and extends up to the motor makes it really comfortable to hold. And to up the comfort factor, Das Germans molded the shape of the motor where the index finger and the thumb go. Also contributing to the ergonomics are its squat stance and its light weight. The Bosch router was the lightest router of the group, which means it's even lighter than the Metabo, and that thing's half plastic. For the adjustment mechanism, it looks like they chose precision over simplicity. They have the main latch just like all the other routers, but then you have to turn the base to either be in the locked or unlocked position indicated by the two white icons. But the icons are kind of misleading. Instead of a locked and unlocked icon, it really should be some kind of macro and micro icon. Because in the quote, locked position, that's the only way that you can make micro adjustments using the little red dial. And the macro adjustments don't work in this position. But in the quote, unlocked position, that's the only way you can make macro adjustments, and the micro adjustments don't work in that position. And regardless if it's in the locked or unlocked position, once you refasten the latch, everything's locked into place. So other routers definitely have simpler adjustment mechanisms, but I don't know if any have one that is more precise. Because when using the dial to make macro adjustments, the Bosch seemed to me to be the easiest to make super fine adjustments, even for the most ham-fisted among us. The base is a bit small for my liking, but it does give indentions to put your fingers to aid in stability. Of note, the corded version of this router does the same thing, it's just bigger, which equates to better in my opinion. For changing the bit, this router has something that none of the other routers have had so far, and that is this spindle lock switch. When the switch is in the lock position, you can use just one wrench to loosen and tighten the collet, completely eliminating the need to use 2 wrenches or keep that tiny spindle lock button depressed. It also acts like another safety feature, because when it's in the lock position, it's impossible to accidentally turn the router on. But if you try, it won't mess up your motor or anything. The LED lights will just flash to let you know the lock is engaged. Additional safety features include the spindle brake and drop detection. However, the drop detection doesn't necessarily detect a drop then kill the motor. It seems to kill the motor upon impact with the ground or a bench or something. For power, the Bosch tied with the DeWalt for the fastest time on the 2-foot rapid cut at 10 seconds with a 4 amp hour battery and no shutoffs. Especially more impressive considering that this is the lightest router of the bunch. And at an MSRP of $219, it's also tied with DeWalt for the most expensive. But where the DeWalt gives you no extras. The Bosch comes with an edge guide, a dust chute, and a chip shield. But they don't stop there. In addition to the standard dust chute that most of the other brands provide, they provide a second dust chute especially designed for edge profiling. So it looks like Bosch took its time and did it right. And with one router to go, right now, it sits a tier above any of the other routers we've seen so far. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about this Flex router is giving single white female vibes. I don't know. Let's just keep going. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the Flex brand, I'd understand if you thought this was just a cheap DeWalt knockoff. But I can assure you, that is not the case. Flex actually started in Germany in 1922, and in 2013 they became part of the Shervon brand. Shervon also makes the Skill brand of tools, which are marketed more towards hobbyists, where the Flex tools are marketed more towards professionals. So this is far from a cheap counterfeit DeWalt, but clearly they benchmarked what I called earlier, one of the big dogs in the market. And honestly, I think what they did was just take what was already a great router and just made it better. And I'll tell you why. But first, let's go over the similarities. The size. The Flex is almost identically sized to the DeWalt, with the Flex being ever so slightly shorter and thinner, and 2 ounces heavier than the DeWalt. In fact, they're so close in size that I wanted to see if they would fit in each other's bases, and they did not. The adjustment. They both have the same adjustment mechanism that encompasses both the macro and micro adjustments into one ring. I did come across one video for the Flex router that said that this small ring just below the main ring is what made micro adjustments when you turned it. But that's fake news. That's not true. The ring doesn't adjust to anything. It serves the same function that it does on the DeWalt, which is to just measure how much you're adjusting the bit when you turn the big ring. And just like the DeWalt, each tick mark is 1/64 of an inch, and a full turn is 1/2 inch. The base. Both routers come with the same D-shaped bases, and they are, you guessed it, identically sized. And the power. Both routers have a ton of power. The Flex took 11 seconds to cut the rabbit, whereas the DeWalt took 10. The Flex, however, was using a 2.5 amp hour battery, while the DeWalt used a 5 amp hour battery. If the Flex had a bigger battery, it might have been the fastest here. Okay, so that's the similarities, but where's the Flex better? One of my gripes about the DeWalt was the power switch. Well, Flex addressed that by putting just a big, easy to use button that you push for on and push for off. And if you're worried about accidentally powering the router on with that button, you don't have to, because this router has a spindle lock function just like the Bosch that will keep the unit from powering on when it's in its locked position. You know, in addition to making it easier to change the bit. The Flex is also $20 cheaper than the DeWalt. And lastly, it comes with a bunch more stuff. Once again, this is what you get with the DeWalt. The Flex, on the other hand, comes with an edge guide that attaches faster and easier than any of the other edge guides. It also has these extending arms for added stability, similar to what you get on some more expensive aftermarket edge guides. It comes with a dust chute and a second base that you can use for templating. But the most important thing when you are template routing, or routing with a round base against a straight edge, is making sure that your base is centered. The best tool for centering the base is a centering cone, which you typically have to buy separately, but not with Flex because they include that too. So obviously the Flex is going to be in a tier above the DeWalt, but where does that leave us with all the routers? What do these tiers even mean? The bottom tier of routers is for battery platform loyalists. The Ryobi is severely lacking in power compared to the other routers, and unless price is your only consideration or you just really want to stay in the Ryobi platform, I suggest looking elsewhere. The Makita is a better router than the Ryobi, but at $200, there are better options available if you're not team ride or die teal. The next tier is what I like to call they're a great second router tier. Both the Metabo and Ridgid are good solid routers, and I was definitely pleasantly surprised with the Ridgid when comparing it to the quarter counterpart that I've owned for a few years now. But given that neither Ridgid or Metabo even offer the ability to purchase a plunge base with these routers, I wouldn't be able to put them in the same category, capability and versatility wise, as some of these other routers. But I especially like the Metabo as a router to keep a roundover bit or a chamfer bit in at all times, given its low price, low weight, and the ability to use it one-handed when doing repeated edge profile work. Milwaukee and DeWalt share the tier above that, the oldie but goodie tier. Both of these routers are super solid with good power and adjustability. They also have plenty of accessories to make them versatile, with plenty of base plates and plunge bases that you can purchase for them. But they're both getting a bit long in the tooth, which is what left them a tier below the innovations that both Bosch and Flex brought to the party. But these two are still top sellers in the category, and for good reason. They're great routers that get the job done, and they're attached to two of the most extensive, popular battery platforms in the market. And obviously, the best of the best are Bosch and Flex. And I was going to say that it's just because they're newer, but the Ryobi is new too, and that's at the bottom. So really, this is just the story of two routers that are powerful, comfortable, and offer features that the others don't. But we can't just have the Bosch and the Flex be at the top. This is America. We have to have a winner.
I want winners.
And based on my scoring system, the winner is Bosch, for the reasons that I mentioned and more. But this video is long enough, so if you want more detail on the scoring system, etc., like I said, just let me know in the comments, and I'll put an article together. Alright? Y'all take it easy.